This episode is brought to you by DeSanto Propane. DeSanto has been serving the energy needs of upstate New York since 1937. They're a fourth-generation family-owned business that has prioritized dependability, reliability, and integrity. If you have energy needs, call DeSanto and tell them we sent you. Visit DeSantoPropane.com to learn more. And by the Fox family of dealerships on Route 5 in Auburn. Check out their vast inventory of new and used cars by visiting foxdealerships.com. All right, welcome to episode 219 of the Inside the FLX podcast here on FingerLakes1.com. I'm Josh Durso, and today we are getting back into the race for the 131st District. Assemblyman Brian Kolb will retire at the end of this year, and in his place, several Republicans have stepped forward. The first of those to step forward was Manchester Town Supervisor Jeff Gallahan, who joins me in studio now. Jeff, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Josh. I appreciate the invitation.
So, first things first, why run? What was the inspiration here?
Well, we have to date this back to when Assemblyman Kolb decided that he was going to run for governor. He approached me at a function and asked me if I would be interested in filling his shoes in the 131st. I was really excited about hearing that he would be confident enough to ask me that. There's some big shoes to fill. Brian was a wonderful, and it still is a wonderful assemblyman. I went home and discussed that with my wife, and we kicked it around. And you know, I'm always looking for better ways to govern our community as supervisor. And we came to the conclusion that maybe if I got into Albany, we'd get some fresh ideas down there. I'm a small businessman, as is my wife. We have a good business together. So I thought that change is the reason that I am running, and the way that the state is being governed now is not conducive to small business staying here. It's not conducive to our residents staying here. It's a shame that the governor blames it on the weather. I was looking at the thruway last week when we had 50-degree days, and I didn't see any U-Hauls coming in. So that's the reason that I am here in the race. And when he announced that he was not running again, I discussed it with my wife and family again and decided that, yeah, I'm ready to do this, and I'm ready to help upstate.
What has been the feedback so far from the voters that you have got the opportunity to talk to? What kind of things have they been bringing to your attention, and sort of what's been the consensus so far?
Well, if you go back to when I was first approached by Brian, the issues have changed. The issues have changed greatly. Back then it was when we had control of the Senate. The Second Amendment wasn't being discussed like it is today. I hear there's six different issues in the budget that he has that reflect the Second Amendment rights or the infringement upon our Second Amendment rights. But moreover, lately, it's the big hot topic right now is naturally bail reform, and I disagree with the policy. And moreover, I think that bail reform is bad, but discovery is worse. And the problem with discovery is we're not going to have people that are willing to step forward and be witnesses anymore. We're not going to have the comfort of knowing that people are worried about our protection and they're willing to step up and do something about it. Because within 15 days, whoever that defendant is, male, female, whatever they did, they have that information and could go back and interview that particular person. So discovery, I think, is much more of a problem than bail reform. But neither one are good for our economy and the safety of our citizens here in the 131st.
And given your role, obviously on the Board of Supervisors in Ontario County, has discovery been the more difficult one on the administrative side to navigate for the county in terms of not only, I guess, sort of physical administration, but then also sort of the cost side of it too, because it seems like for a lot of counties throughout the region, there's been a lot of unexpected, I guess, or unintended costs that have come along with it.
That's true. And another unfunded mandate. They just keep slamming us with them. It's killing our budget. We have to put extra man hours on every single case now. We have to look at it 2 and 3 different ways. The problem is we didn't have that in our budget. We constructed our budget last year and passed it, and these mandates come down, and we have no control over that. So we have to shift funding. We have to take funding from services that we need to provide to our residents and put it into this new program, and the resources aren't there right now. And I don't know if we'll be reimbursed. We don't know if that's going to happen in the future. It's tying up our court system. It's tying up our police force, all our police forces, and it's tying up our courts, even our small courts. We had in the town of Manchester, I mean, we have the thruway, so we're one of the busier courts in Ontario County, right. But our postage is skyrocketing just because of the notifications that we have to send out, and our clerks are putting in extra hours, and it's become a nightmare.
Is one of the frustrations, take the politics if you could out of it, is one of the frustrations with Albany that there seems to be a lack of financial consideration for a lot of the bills and the laws that are ultimately adopted. They might sound good to certain folks in the political spectrum, depending on where you fall, but the cost analysis, it seems from the outside, it seems to be lacking. Is that one of the big frustrations? That's
the number one frustration. And the number two frustration is when they construct these bills and when they put these into law, they're not inviting the Sheriff's Association in. They're not talking to local law enforcement. The same thing with the Farm Bill. There was no farmers in that room. They're constructing all this legislation based upon hearsay, and they have actually no experience, some of these people, at all. And they're affecting our lives drastically. And that's got to stop. When bills come before the Assembly and the Senate, I would expect that they would have the proper organizations and the proper representatives from that sector be part of those discussions, because quite frankly, it really hurts when they pass bills and they don't have the knowledge to know what's going to happen after that bill's passed 6 or 8 or 10 months down the road.
Upstate, downstate, obviously one of the bigger talking points and one of the bigger challenges, though, that a lot of folks upstate feel in terms of representation. If you go to Albany, how would you work with not just folks within the Republican conference, but also Democrats to see that this region, the 131st, within the Finger Lakes, is represented in Albany?
That's a good question, and one I've been thinking very, very hard on. I have a philosophy for that, and I have a plan. Upstate, downstate, there's been a riff like the Hatfields and the McCoys for a long time now, and fueling that is not helping our situation at all. We need to go down there with an open mind. There's 150 seats that are being voted on for the Assembly in November. If you take 15% of those seats, that has change. I'm not talking about Republican to Democrat or Democrat to Republican. I'm talking about a change in the seat with a new face. Mm-hmm. You're looking at 24, 25 different freshman Assembly people that are going to be showing up in Albany in January. That's a big number. Mm-hmm. I plan, when I go down there, to meet with those folks, invite them to upstate, bring them up here and show them our way of life, take them to the farms, take them to the gun clubs, take them out in society and show them that this is how we live in upstate New York. These are our values. This is what we cherish. And I expect them, on the same term, when I invite them up here, I expect to be invited down to the Bronx and Manhattan or wherever they reside, so I can get a feel for what they need down there, because I don't believe that's happening right now. We're governing from the far right and the far left, and it's not working. It can't work. We need to come to the middle, and we can do that. I think over the next couple elections, if people take the same philosophy that I'm taking, we can come together. You walk out your door and go next door, and if you're a Republican or a Democrat, and you go next door and there's a Republican or Democrat, maybe the opposite party that you represent, you get along. You get along with your neighbors, and that's what we need to do.
What about the rural versus urban sort of split and challenge? Because we even see it here in the Finger Lakes, right? Like, there is a lot of focus on economic development in and around Rochester, and a lot of the Finger Lakes' success stories in terms of economic development, once you get outside of the Seneca Falls and the Genevas, who have won DRI funds, you start to see a lot of tilt toward Rochester. And yesterday I had a conversation on the show with Vinny Esposito, and he said, there is a lot of frustration with that, but that's the way the system is set up. So how would you sort of not only navigate that system, but also find better ways for the rural parts of the region to be represented in Albany, especially when it comes to some of these sort of bigger ticket items like DRI, and making sure that small communities are heard when it comes to those ever important dollars?
Well, first of all, the big cities are run by the Democrats, and that's where the money's coming from. It's very difficult for the minority party to garner funds to bring back to our districts. But moreover, the game that the governor plays with his initiatives for his contests and where the money goes, that kind of stuff has got to stop, because those games that are played, they're not being fair to the small communities outside of the big cities. Now, what's a big city? Rochester, Syracuse, Buffalo, the Buffalo Million. All that comes to mind. And you look at the debacles that have happened with those projects that were sponsored by the big contest. That big contest has got to stop, and it's got to be judged upon the merits and the effects of the community. What's going to happen if Seneca Falls has this new business come to town, and they're going to employ 800-900 people? I mean, it's not a game. It's real life, and it needs to be treated as real life, and they need to understand that down there. And when we go down to Albany from upstate, we need to put the pressure on them and say, look, our communities aren't surviving the way they should be. They're not growing the way they should be, and we need this help.
When you look at all of the issues that are facing, and I'll use Manchester as an example, I would imagine, much like a lot of other communities its size, infrastructure is a challenge, is an issue. Where do you come up with the money? How do you disperse the funds so that you can make sure water, sewer, roads, all of the things that you have operating in the town are operating successfully? How does that need to be a loud, vocal priority in Albany, especially for these rural communities in upstate New York that are 100 plus years old in a lot of cases, infrastructure just sitting 10, 12 feet beneath the earth that's been here longer than most people have?
That's probably the number one issue we have in Manchester. We're an old town.
Yeah.
We've got a bridge on Water Street that I've been applying for grants for the last 4 years. If I can't get grant money, I'm going to have to bond it. Yeah. And if I bond it, it's a burden on my taxpayers. I don't want to do that. So it's a huge challenge to get the money to take care of our infrastructure and our roads. When in Manchester, when we need to do road work, I mean, we're a small community. We only tax our folks a little over $550,000 a year. How far does that go on road reconstruction? It doesn't. So we need help, and we're not getting it, and it's a huge problem. I was at the luncheon last week for the Supervisors Association in Bloomfield. I talked to those guys about it. They're having the same problems in every town, every village, and we need to figure out how we can get more money upstate to fix our roads and bridges. Now, those guys are down in Albany today, as a matter of fact. Contingency went down to talk to our representatives down there about CHIPS money, which CHIPS money has been flat for years and years and years, but our taxes haven't been flat. But the CHIPS money has been flat. And without infrastructure, it's totally different upstate, because you can't go out of your house and jump on the subway. You get out of your house and you get in an automobile and you go to work and you go to the store, and when you recreate, that's how you do it. And commerce moves by, most of our commerce moves by 18-wheeler trucks up here and small delivery trucks. And the infrastructure, our roads and bridges are not good. I've got a water district in Port Gibson. It's 70 years old. I'm going to need some help replacing those lines, and we just started working on a grant for that. So it's very difficult to get the grants. It's very difficult to juggle your budget so that you can take care of the infrastructure, because a healthy community is what you want, and infrastructure is your guide to a healthy community. So it's difficult.
Is there an extra sort of added frustration then when you're facing and dealing with those kinds of issues and challenges, and you hear the governor talk about something like high-speed rail, as opposed to sort of the crucial infrastructure that a lot of the communities in upstate are either lacking or, are going to be lacking because it can't operate, in current speed for, another 20, 30 years.
There's a lot of truth to that. And I don't understand why we would want to take our resources and put it into high-speed rail. The benefit to the entire state is minimal with high-speed rail. The benefit to the entire state to put the money back into roads and bridges, water, sewer, that main infrastructure is going to make us healthy and allow us to grow in the next 10 or 20 years and catch up with the rest of the country because, quite frankly, we're falling behind right now with our current policies and they need to change.
When it comes to policy, you mentioned that you've been a small business owner for some time. What are some of the things from your perspective that could sort of be unchained so that small business owners throughout the 131st could really start running full speed? What would be some of the changes that you'd like to see that would give those folks the opportunity to do more with what they have as opposed to just struggling to get by on a daily, weekly, monthly? Well,
myself, my wife and I run our small business, so employees are not a major factor. Most small businesses, employees are a major factor, and there are several roadblocks for those small businesses and employees that keep them from growing. Number one is the family leave. The family leave was passed, and it hurt small business. Is it a good thing? I think maybe it could be. And time off, the new laws about giving people, having a mandate to give people time off, it kills small business because if that small business has 5 or 6 employees, you take one employee out of the mix, you're talking about 20% of the workforce. I mean, how do they continue to be profitable if at any given time 20% of their workforce is gone? It makes no sense. We need to incentivize, not disincentivize, small business to grow. And on the federal level, back when the Affordable Health Care Act came in, I'm in sales. I call on machine shops, and 90% of the machine shops I call on are small business. Mm-hmm. And those guys are telling me, well, I'm at 45 employees, and I'm growing, but if I go over 50, this Affordable Care Act is going to cost me because I'm mandated to give them all insurance then. So it's the mandates that the federal government and the state put on these small businesses, and the red tape that it's got to go. It's got to be reduced in order for them to incentivize them to hire more people.
What about the taxes and tax incentives? Are they misdirected in terms of where they're going? Instead of one of the philosophies that I've heard pretty regularly from certain folks in this line of work, they've said, instead of giving the breaks to the larger corporations, give them to the small businesses and give them the freedom to be able to start growing, and eventually they'll be able to, contribute what the large players are now. Is that one of the philosophies that you'd like to see change, maybe not just in terms of mandates, but sort of start to peel back the never-ending list of taxes and regulation that a lot of these folks have to deal with?
Incentives are a hot topic, and you're either on the left or the right on that topic. It's either yes or no. Being on the board of directors of the IDA, I'm in the trenches looking at this stuff every single week. I can tell you that in Ontario County, I'm not speaking for any other county, I'm speaking for Ontario County because that's the organization that I belong to. If you look at the tax incentives and pilots that we've issued and not issued, the ones that are not issued, they don't make the newspaper. The ones that are issued make the newspaper. We turn down business all the time. The latest is a car wash. I mean, it doesn't fit our mold. They're going to employ 4 or 5, 6 people maybe. That type of incentive does not fit our mold. We have businesses that we have given pilots to. Have we been burned? A couple times. Yeah. 95% of our businesses all conform to how many employees that they intend on hiring in the future. And I can tell you that our employment rate, if you look at the jobs promised by those companies and the jobs that are actually created by those companies, The jobs that I'm going by memory here. I don't have the statistics in front of me, but I'm telling you, I know that it was 1,440 jobs created in the period 5 years that the report that we look at, and there was 400 and it was either 400 and change, upper 400s that were promised. So these programs do and can work, and a lot of those were for small businesses. And through the IDA, we do give credit to workforce development, so that the employees can train their employers can train their employees, and we pay half the salary for that program. It works great, especially in the skilled trades, high-tech industries. They take advantage of that. Personally, look at my voting record. The last two large projects that were in Canandaigua through the IDA, I canvass my constituents. I am elected to represent my constituents. I canvass my constituents, whether it be a town hall, whether it be Bliss's grocery store in Shortsville, social media. When I'm out, I'm asking people, what do you think of this? What do you think of this project? How do you want me to vote on this? And it was clear to me, the last two projects that came through the IDA, they didn't support, and I didn't support them either. I'm the lone vote, no vote on both of them, but I'm representing my constituents and their needs and their wants. They didn't want to see that. So there is a place for it, and it can be used very successfully, and we do that in Ontario County. We've got a great track record. But there are certain projects that I don't believe need to be incentivized, and both of those happen to be large corporations. But I voted no on those, and will continue to do that and represent my constituents in that manner.
So, staying on the economic development front for a minute, obviously one of the bigger headlines in the last couple months has been obviously Cherry Bundy's decision to exit the district and exit the state, as it would be. Concerns you have with a company like that, which seem to be sort of the poster child for successful economic development efforts here in the Finger Lakes. Concerns you have with a company like that saying, hey, look, the pressures in New York State are just too great, got to go, and having to make that decision despite the state's and economic developers, it seems, best efforts to make sure that they were, given the supports they needed throughout their, growth cycle so that they could function in New York State.
Well, it's funny you mention that because Cherry Bundy is the poster child. And the IDA in Ontario County helped incubate that company. And they spent time in the tech farm, and they outgrew the tech farm. And we helped find them another place, which was in Ontario County, in Geneva, the old Tops building. And we didn't hear anything for a long time about their troubles. They're having a hard time with crops. There's not a lot of cherries growing here in New York anymore, and where we're relocating to is a huge cherry producer. So let's go back to infrastructure and cost for them to transport that product in order to make their juice. That's a problem. Another problem is taxes and red tape and employees. I mean, they grew that company exponentially and were very successful. And they've got some great customers and clients out there, including professional athletes and sports. But the fact of the matter is they can no longer afford to do business here in New York and be profitable. Is that all because of New York red tape? No, that's a big part of it, probably the biggest part of it. But another part of it was their logistics and their transportation. Fortunately for us, the bright side of the whole Cherry Bundy situation is they're keeping corporate in Geneva for now in that building, and they're going to sublease that building out, hopefully to some other business that will garner us more employees and tax dollars and keep us healthy in Ontario County. Transportation.
That's probably the most connected issue in terms of what we hear from the different stakeholders who we have on the show. Do you have concerns with the difficulty or the distance that exists between some of the communities in this district and the challenges that are either directly or indirectly posed on families, seniors, whatever the group may be, because of that transportation issue? Obviously, we're probably never going to see a really strong public transportation system in the 131st, but what do you think Albany could do to sort of help the process along so that these communities can have something maybe a little better than what we have now?
Well, it all boils down to funding. We had our own transportation system in Ontario County, and it came to the point where we couldn't afford to do it anymore. So we partnered with RTS. If you think about it, and everybody talks about the golden years, and as my dad used to say, when you get into your golden years, you become dependent on your family and your friends, because in upstate New York, here in 131st, how do you get to the doctor? How do you get to the hospital? How do you get to the grocery store, the post office, the bank? Folks in their 70s and 80s, a lot of them don't care about the computer and doing their banking on the computer, and they don't believe in it. They want the check in their hand. They want to go to the bank, and I respect that to the end. And once you lose your ability to drive an automobile, you lose your freedom. Your freedom's gone. So we need to find a way to get those folks to the doctor, to the bank. Right now, it seems to be falling on the backs of the local organizations that do it for free,
right?
And that can't sustain itself. So we do need to go to Albany and talk about that issue, and we need to go down there and ask them for funding for that, because quite frankly, here in upstate New York, if you're limited to your transportation with an automobile, then it becomes can become a mental health issue for those folks, because they feel shut in, they can't get out, they can't socialize, and it's just not a good situation. It needs to be addressed for sure.
Is that part of it? You mentioned something that is pretty. I try to talk about it as much as I can on this show. The graying of some of the communities in the Finger Lakes, especially some of the more rural ones. There isn't an influx of, at least not one that we've heard sort of stories anecdotally, but there isn't any data that shows that we're seeing an influx of young people, of 20 and 30 somethings moving into these communities, other than a couple exceptions. Obviously, in Ontario County, there are some great exceptions, but by and large, across upstate New York, that's not the case. So when it comes to the sort of aging half of it, and I realize this is probably part housing problem, part education problem, and how we retain folks. What are your thoughts there in terms of what kind of problem that poses for you as a representative or a potential representative heading to Albany?
Well, you mentioned Ontario County being the exception, and we're fortunate. But we're not the exception by mistake. We work extremely hard at that. And we collaborate with local school systems. We collaborate with builders. We collaborate with industry. We do everything we can to make Ontario County a county that's looked up to. And that goes right back to the Board of Supervisors. When you sit at the Board of Supervisors meeting, we have a round table. I defy anybody in that room to tell me who's an independent, who's a Republican, and who's a Democrat. Because we get together and we govern. We govern for our citizens in Ontario County. And because of that, I think the collaborative effort between county and village and town is extraordinary. So we're all working together to strive to make it an attractive place for young people to come, for young people to stay, which is just as important, because we have people raising families here. Their kids graduate from college or going to a trade school, and they're gone because of the economic climate here in New York. So we are trying to, and we do, I think we do a good job of it, garner the relationships that we have. Now, if I can represent the whole 131st, I know those practices. I know them inside and out. I'm happy to share everything that we do with the rest of my district in the 131st. And I'm sure that we can make a difference. Just getting together, talking about it, strategizing, and looking at what we need for the future in this community. What does Seneca Falls need in the next 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years? How about Waterloo? What's going on down there? Let's get our finger on the pulse and find out how we can attract the younger generation to come to New York. I mean, our area is absolutely gorgeous. You drive the lakes and the waterfalls and the parks in our area. We're second to none in the country. That's a huge attractant for young people and middle-aged people, and the people that have stayed here enjoy that so much. So I think if we have a collaborative effort in our local governments and schools and education systems, despite what they do in Albany to us up here, we can attract people to this area.
And my last question for you, folks who might want to learn more about your campaign, more about where you are on the issues, where can they find you? How can they get a hold of you?
They can call me anytime at the numbers listed on my Facebook page, Gallahan for Assembly. And I am open to go anywhere, talk to anybody. I've got a whole bunch of town committees that I will be visiting in the next couple of weeks to talk to all the constituents that are out there and let them know, the ones that don't know me, who I am, what I stand for. It's an open book. I'm an open book, and I have a philosophy in my governing at the town. Somebody calls me with a complaint, I answer the complaint on the phone, but I ask them, where do you live? I want to come to your house and let's talk about this, because there's nothing better than face to face. And that's my philosophy in governing. I want to be out there. I want to be in front of the people, with the people, and for the people. And that's how I govern.
Jeff, appreciate the time. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you, Josh. I appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thanks for joining us this hour on Inside the FLX. I'm Josh Durso, and we'll be back next week with another episode. In the meantime, download the FingerLakes1.com app to have the latest local breaking news, alerts, and podcasts delivered right to your hand each and every day. Follow and subscribe to the show on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. If you enjoy the program and can support us, head over to patreon.com/FL1 to pledge monthly support. If you have an idea for a show or simply want to let your voice be heard, drop us an email or leave us a voice message by visiting InsideTheFLX.com. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you back here next week.